at the risk of ruining an otherwise lovely event, I'm going to take us into the realm of politics. This is in part because it's what I know, and in part because politics is so often what keeps us from achieving the thoughtful, inspiring ideas we hear at events like this. Politics is what leaves us thinking, that's a great idea, too bad it'll never happen. I don't think most people understand the politics of education. I think they get lost in conversations about the cut scores on tests or the year-over-year reliability of evaluation models. Or worse, they hear only personal attacks and name-calling passing for discourse. And so everyday people detach from the conversation entirely, or they superficially attach to whatever ideological tribe they usually agree with. This is bad for the conversation. I offer a framework, then, for thinking about education politics. For although there are technical, complex matters in education, those aren't what the fights are really about. The politics of education can be almost entirely understood by understanding two opposing worldviews. And every education fight that is really a fight is about people with these two worldviews yelling at each other. One worldview is about poverty and context. This group of people point to decades of research showing that children from low-income families, children with less educated parents, and children of color face day-to-day disadvantages and traumas that make it hard for them to learn. Family income is a devastatingly accurate predictor of future test scores. So this group of people, if you ask them what we should do about education, we'll talk about supporting students and families. They'll talk about engaging parents in the process, or serving breakfast at school, or providing a safe place for students to spend the after-school hours. There are many good, reasonable people who would probably identify with this worldview, especially when I describe it the way I just did. The problem with this outlook is this very real tendency. A tendency to say that our education system per se is doing the best it possibly can, and we'll never see any real movement until we fix poverty. And so this tendency is to build protective fences around teachers and schools and classrooms and say, leave them alone, they're doing just fine. This is a poverty problem, not an education problem. The second worldview is sort of a mirror of the first. This group of people, for one thing, speak about education in a more narrow way, a way that's focused on academic learning and doesn't have much room for services like mental health care and family outreach. This group of people would say, stop talking about poverty and stop using it as an excuse for heartbreakingly poor academic performance. Because, and this is important and it's valid, education and knowledge should provide a way out of poverty. So please don't tell me you can't make any progress with a deeply impoverished student. Why are we sending him to school at all if his educational outcomes will only ever reflect the circumstances of his birth? So this group of people, if you ask them what we should do about education, will focus on changes to classrooms, instructions, and teachers. There are many good, reasonable people who would probably identify with this worldview. Here's the problem with it, which should follow logically from everything I've been saying. This group of people has a very real tendency to downplay or even ignore the devastating effects of poverty. They point to one or two exceptions in our community, whether they're schools or individuals, who have raised themselves out of poverty and say, see, they did it. Everyone else could too if they just worked harder and followed best practices. This discounts the work of a teacher who may spend an entire academic year helping a student from a refugee family get comfortable with modern plumbing, with electricity, and with not being constantly afraid. This teacher will have created valuable stability in that child's life, which will never be reflected in his reading and math improvement for the year. The current climate makes people feel they have to choose between these two flawed extremes. And I believe the actual differences of opinion have been so obscured by name-calling that people don't even know what they're being asked to choose. You may decide your ideology places you firmly in one camp or the other. I believe Any serious attempt to fix what ails education must be attentive to factors both inside and outside of school. I recently used the word moderate in a conversation with a mentor. He warned me off that word, saying it too often means splitting the difference between two bad ideas, or giving a program half the funding it needs to work. That's not the kind of moderation I'm asking you for. I am asking you to re-examine your beliefs, to pick and choose the parts you like from each worldview until you come to an education ideology that is your own. And then I'm asking you to advocate for it. You could do this by contacting your legislator or school board member, but I would be content if your advocacy consisted of speaking up the next time you hear someone talk about failing schools or blaming our educational woes on certain kinds of parents. In fact, the only thing I would specifically ask you to do in your advocacy is to avoid any name-calling at all.